Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing net neutrality, the idea that internet service providers should treat all internet traffic equally. The United States and the European Union are still grappling with regulation, while 3 countries, Chile, the Netherlands and Brazil, all have net neutrality provisions in place already. Joining us is Joshua Steimle. He's the CEO of the digital marketing firm MWI, based in Hong Kong. Here in Washington, D.C., Cathy Sloan. She serves as an advocate for the Computer and Communications Industry Association. And joining us from Amsterdam is Daalen. He's an attorney who specializes in technology and competition law. Cathy, the Federal Communications Commission we've been talking about, they're better known as the FCC. It's led by 5 commissioners appointed by the President. They are confirmed by the Senate. I mean, one can understand Congress in the United States wanting to ensure unfettered access to information. That's part of the U.S. Constitution, in fact. Right. But it has become a very divisive, partisan, political issue in this country. Why is that?
Well, I would say it's because of the political power of the incumbent cable and telephone companies who directly and through their trade associations give huge amounts of cash to elected representatives every cycle, and have been for many, many years, since they were, in fact, in the case of telephone, a regulated, government monopoly with guaranteed profits and all of that. And in the case of cable, since they were exclusive local franchisees with protection from competition. And getting back to the point of competition, Joshua in Hong Kong made the point that we should, if the FCC does anything effective here, that will make the competitive situation worse, somehow reduce competition. But it happens to be the fact that the company that is making the most inroads in local landline competition and new connections, high-speed connections for homes and businesses, is Google Fiber in Kansas City and in Austin, Texas. And they do not oppose this movement by the FCC to classify internet access as telecommunications.
Okay, Joshua, when we talk about this, I mean, as you've just heard there, the big internet companies here in the United States, the duopoly, as they've been referred to, they have a lot of financial power. They can go into Congress and they can spend a lot of money on getting what they want. In any other part of the world, that'll be known as corruption. So shouldn't the government step in here and say, look, we can't allow these companies with their money to dictate policy for the entire country. We need to step in here to make sure that there is a level playing field.
If we could trust the government to step in and do the right thing, then maybe that would be a great thing for the government to step in. But the chairman of the FCC is Tom Wheeler, who is one of the former lobbyists for the cable industry. The head lobbyist in the cable industry right now is Michael Powell, who was the former head of the FCC. So we've got a cable guy running the lobbying organization. We've got a cable guy running the FCC. Can we trust this organization to write laws that are not going to favor the large telcos, the Comcast and the Time Warners? It seems to me that if we say, come in government and fix this situation, they're going to fix it all right, but they're going to fix it in favor of the cable industry, because that's the background of these guys who are running the FCC.
Daalen, is this also a very big political issue in Europe?
It definitely is. Not one where the minister-president spoke out like Obama did, but it still is very important. So, as you already pointed out, the European Union is considering legislation on this point, and the European Parliament recently actually voted for net neutrality. So now the Council of Ministers, which contains representatives of all European member states, has to take a position on this as well. And it turns out that they are not really in favor of net neutrality, and the Italian presidency recently introduced a proposal which would dilute the proposal of the European Parliament and actually would make net neutrality more of a principle, sort of a goal which it would be nice to strive for, and not really a strict law which can be implemented in all member states.
Cathy, a Republican FCC Commissioner, Ajit Pai, he spoke out recently against net neutrality and told the National Journal, which is a publication here in the United States, this is what he said, and I'm quoting here: "The net result is that every single American broadband customer will have to pay a new tax or taxes to access the internet. That translates into less broadband adoption, especially among the millions of families that still struggle to make ends meet in this lackluster economy." So will it cost customers more?
Well, that's only if the FCC decides to employ the universal service provisions directly to broadband, which would include a subsidy for broadband build-out to rural areas and high-cost areas. But that could be one of the sections of Title II that the FCC decides to forbear from applying. So that's...
Explain the Title II to us. What is
So
that?
Title II is the part of the Telecom Act of '96 that specifically governs two-way telecommunications by wire or radio, as opposed to Title I that's just ancillary services, and Title III that's broadcast television and radio, and Title VI, I think that's cable. Title II is about two-way telecommunications.
And the internet falls under Title II right now, does it?
It used to, like I described just earlier. It doesn't right now because of the 2002 decision of the FCC regarding cable and the 2005 decision of the FCC regarding telephone internet access, that neither of those would be Title II, that they in fact would be Title I, ancillary services, information services that are no different than AOL or Yahoo, and which is in itself a little bit silly that you would think of your internet connection as no more important than some website, right?
Right, Joshua, if we have a situation where broadband providers can charge certain companies, let's say a higher cost for premium access, doesn't that effectively shut out startups and new companies that are coming onto the internet that want to compete on the same basis with those big companies?
This has been brought up as a concern, but I don't know how valid the concern really is. We haven't seen this really happening. We don't know if this is going to happen. It's a hypothetical situation. Whereas we know that when the government gets in, they tend to rig the playing field for their friends. They tend to set things up in a way that benefits the larger corporations versus the smaller startups. And so for me, I'm less worried about what might happen in a more free market if the Time Warners and the Comcasts were allowed to do whatever they want, but they had to play in a free market. That concerns me much less than what would happen if the government were regulating things, because the large corporations tend to control the government in their favor. And I'd rather they be on their own than have the control of the government in addition to what they already have.
All right, and speaking of those large corporations, Ot van Daalen, how much concern is there in Europe that much of the infrastructure of the internet worldwide right now is controlled by the United States, and much of the content that's moving around the internet is controlled by United States corporations as well?
Well, so first of all, let me address Joshua's point about it being a hypothetical case. I don't think that's really fair. For example, in the Netherlands, the reason why the Dutch legislator adopted net neutrality regulation was because the Dutch incumbent announced it would start charging for using separate services like YouTube or WhatsApp. And if you would like to be able to use those services, you would actually have to pay more. And you don't need to extrapolate really far into the future to understand that the next YouTube would have to also gain a new audience before it would become successful, and it would be very expensive. So now with regard to your question as to concern about US infrastructure and US services, I think there's very much concern about this. For example, the European Commission already yesterday, the European Parliament leaked a draft resolution which announced it would like to split up Google into separate parts, which I think is a very far-ranging measure and not necessarily I'm in favor of. But it goes to the heart of the debate on where we want our data and our services to be. And I think that there's proponents are gaining traction for more localized internet services using clouds in the Netherlands or in Europe instead of America, out of privacy concerns. So this is definitely something to watch out for.
Those privacy concerns, that's something else that has come up. And doesn't the United States government, to a large extent, already regulate the internet by basically snooping on everyone's content?
To the extent that they do snoop on users, that is the NSA. That is not the FCC. The FCC has no power to listen into your telephone conversations or monitor or control your content at all. And Title II wouldn't give them that. The only nexus that the FCC has over content is in the context of broadcast television and radio, because those licensees use the public airwaves and are expected to do certain things in return to serve the public interest. But this is not about content control at all.
Right. Insofar as the introduction of new rules, changes that are going to be made by the FCC, we're now hearing, well, it's indefinite. We don't know when that's going to happen. Why have they, as they say in the United States, kicked the can down the road?
Well, sort of because their initial proposals, their internal proposals, were, as Joshua suggested, going to be too much in the direction of protecting the internet access providers, the incumbent cable and telephone companies. But what happened is all the startups that Joshua professes to be worried about came crashing down on the FCC saying, no, this will hurt us if you allow them to do paid prioritization and you allow them to discriminate. So that you've got venture capitalists and startup companies and even some US businesses that are not startups, like the realtors. Anybody that uses the internet in their daily business to communicate with video is going to need a good amount of throughput to continue to do business, including using video over the internet. And so all of those companies have been organizing themselves. There's a new outfit called Internet Freedom Business Alliance, and you know, basically imploring the FCC to provide some real enforceable open internet rules for the first time.
All right, let me get Joshua's response to that. Joshua, what do you make of what Cathy was saying, and where is it going to all go to from here? Because we don't see any definitive path here. I mean, they've kicked it down the road indefinitely.
Yes, you do see a lot of startups supporting net neutrality, but you also see a lot of large corporations as well. Google's a huge company. eBay's a huge company. These are not startups. These are huge corporations. And Comcast itself is in favor of net neutrality. They've come out and made statements and said they support almost everything in net neutrality. And I think that might be telling. That might bear looking into a little bit more. So once again, it's not that these companies are being entirely altruistic, I believe. They're looking out for their self-interest. Startups see something here. Of course they don't want to be charged more money. But the same for Google and for eBay, of course. They don't want to pay for the bandwidth that they're taking up as well.
Okay, we are going to have to leave this conversation right there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter @CCTV America. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.